Limbus company's second Nursefather identity has been released, and this time around it's none other than the House of Spiders Ring Nursefather Hong Lu. And, unlike his index counterpart, Hong Lu's banner features his protege right beside him, with that identity being the House of Spiders Ring Apprentice Faust. This shiny metallic duo is a set of bleed and unique charge identities, who get the best of both worlds and call back to the established mechanics of the Ring Syndicate that you all know and love. Their kits are pretty multifaceted, and the way they impact team building is very significant. So while I'm sure most of you guys have already made up your mind on getting them, today I want to answer the very important questions of how to use these identities properly and what teams to build around them. To answer these questions, I will swiftly go over the kits of both Hong Lu and Faust, before explaining their strengths and synergies and looking at their performance in their preferred teams. But before we do that, I have to remind you that most of my viewers are not subscribed. So if you find yourself coming back to my videos or end up enjoying this one, consider subscribing. It takes just 1 second and helps me out a lot. Now let's get to the rings. We'll start with their kits, and Hong Lu is the first one we'll look at. He has reasonably high health, average base speed, and a +2 defense level. His Sin Affinity spread consists of Pride, Envy and Lust, with a Lust defense. All of Hong Lu's skills gain power based on bleed on the target. His skill 1 is Anatomize. It rolls up to 14, deals more damage based on debuffs on the enemy, and its coins inflict 4 bleed and 2 defense level down, while giving Hong Lu 2 defense level up. He also has a skill 1-2, which is aimed at allies and doesn't actually hit, but it applies 6 offense level up. His skill 2 is Gather Ingredient. It rolls up to 20, also deals bonus damage based on debuffs, and if Hong Lu has 10 or more corpus ingredient count, the skill consumes 5 on use and gains 1 clash power as well as unbreakable coins. The coins of the skill inflict 2 bleed count and 1 bind, and give 1 haste and 4 corpus count. On hit with the last coin, if the enemy has 5 or more debuffs, Hong Lu uses his skill 2-2 against the target. The skill 2-2 in question is Installation Art number 3 Improvised Ribcage. It hits twice, is unclashable and does not trigger defense skills. On use, it consumes 4 corpus count. Its coins inflict 2 bleed, deal bonus damage based on debuffs, deal 5 SP damage and heal 5 SP for Hong Lu, while also inflicting Corpus Theater. Hong Lu's skill 3 is Tibia's Melody. It rolls up to 21, deals bonus damage based on unused attack weight, at 10 or more corpus count it consumes up to 20 count to gain 2 final power, bonus damage, and at 3 and 5 corpus potency, 1 and 2 extra attack weight respectively. The coins of the skill inflict 4 bleed potency and 1 count, as well as 1 bind and 1 damage down, while giving Hong Lu 1 haste and 1 slash damage up, and dealing extra damage based on negative effects. He also has a skill 3-2, Closing Time. This one has 5 coins, rolls up to 25, and has very similar effects to that of the skill 3, while also applying thematic Frisian-inspiring melody on all ring identities at attack end. The skill inflicts all the same debuffs and gives the same buffs, inflicts 1 less bleed potency, but makes up for it with Corpus Theater and 5 burn. As for Hong Lu's defense, he has any weight. It rolls up to 14, gives him assist defense, and it inflicts bind and gives haste on evade. The assist defense skill is a counter, which behaves similarly to Hong Lu's skill 2, but it inflicts 2 bleed and 1 bleed count, while dealing less damage and not having a second version. As for his passives, Hong Lu has 3. The first one, Magnum Opus Tibia, gives Hong Lu his unique charge at combat start based on the total number of ring allies on the team. At skill end, if it dealt damage, Hong Lu gets 5 corpus count, getting 3 more on kill. This passive also lets Hong Lu get corpus potency by consuming 10 corpus count. When he gets to 2 potency, Hong Lu gets tibia, and his skills count as charge skills for mirror dungeon purposes. The second passive is Transcend the Corpus. It gives Hong Lu 21 stacks of viewing the tableau at encounter start. When a ring ally uses a skill, 1 stack of this effect is lost. At turn end, if Hong Lu doesn't have the effect anymore, he gets his skill 3-2 in his bottom leftmost slot at the next turn start, once per encounter. If the skill becomes inaccessible, it comes back again. Also, at turn end, if Hong Lu is staggered by damage, he recovers from stagger once per turn. His third passive is a Maestro's Critique, and it requires 4 lust owned. This passive makes Hong Lu use his skill 1-2 on Ring Apprentice Faust if she is about to use her skill 3. Also, on hit, if the enemy has a negative effect, Hong Lu heals 4 SP at attack end and gains 1 slash damage up instead, if he's at 45 already, though that one only comes once per turn. His support passive requires 3 Lust Resonance, and at turn end, it inflicts 2 offense level down and 1 bleed count against the fastest enemy next turn. Next up, we have the Kit of Faust, and I will be even more brief with this one. High health, low speed, same defense level. Her sins are Gluttony, Envy and Lust, with a Lust defense. Faust has 2 sets of skills, but they're effectively copies of each other, with some small differences. Her skill 1 is essentially the same as that of Hong Lu, but it inflicts 1 bleed count instead of 4 potency. The base form gets clash power and the old form gets damage. The skill 2 is, again, a copy of Hong Lu, lacking the extra skill 2-2. Once again, the base gets power, the old gets damage. Also, skill 2-1 doesn't give haste. Faust's skill 3-2 is effectively a 1-to-1 replica of Hong Lu's skill 3-1, and her skill 3-1 lacks the attack weight and buffs, but gets triple the damage scaling off of corpus consumed. Faust has 2 defense skills as well. The base form gets a clashable guard, which inflicts 2 bleed count on clash win and also deals pierce damage based on bleed on the target. As for her old defense, you guessed it, it's exactly like Hong Lu's. Faust also has 3 passives. Her first one is a copy of Hong Lu, but she has fascia instead of tibia. Her second passive gives Faust Iron Maiden at encounter start, and at turn end, if Faust has fascia, she loses Iron Maiden and gains flow state instead. She also gets unstaggered. Her third passive requires 4 lust owned, and this one doubles the effects of Somatic Frisian Inspiring Melody on Faust, while also getting the same SP healing and slash damage as Hong Lu, though her healing is cut down to a max of twice per turn. Faust's support passive requires 1 lust and 2 envy owned, and it inflicts 4 bleed on the attacker if the hurt ally equipped a defense skill, up to 2 times per turn, with the 4 bleed turning into 2 count if the enemy already has bleed. This is it for the kits, but we must also look through the unique effects that belong to this duo. Corpus Ingredient is just unique charge. Corpus Theater has a base stack of 3, and each time the enemy gets inflicted with bleed, they gain 1 of 3 bleed, 1 bind or 1 defense power down next turn, while losing 1 stack once per skill. Somatic Frisian Inspiring Melody lasts forever, and gives afflicted allies 1 speed, 1 clash power and 10% more damage. Viewing the tableau decays by 2 every turn, and gives Hong Lu 2 protection if Faust is on the field. Iron Maiden is Faust's base form. It gives her 4 aggro, 1 protection, 5 defense level up and a 5% HP shield. When Faust is hit by the last coin of a skill, she reflects part of the damage and inflicts 2 bleed count, up to 3 times per turn. The Self-Unbound flow state is Faust's old form. It gives her 2 speed, new skills and plus 20% damage against slower units. Fascia and Tibia are Faust's and Hong Lu's swords respectively, and their effects scale with corpus potency. The first stage gives 1 base power, the second adds 10% damage against enemies with bleed, the third makes these units inflict 1 bleed and 1 bleed count when inflicting bleed or bleed count, and stages 4 and 5 give even more base power, but Fascia lacks a stage 5. With this, we're done with the kits for good, and now we can move on to the Ring Duo's performance in combat. The identities are Bleed incarnate, as one would expect, so we'll take their performance in Bleed as the main course, dipping slightly into Charge near the end of the video. The two identities are meant to be used as a duo, with direct synergy inside their kits. Hong Lu is a multifaceted machine, with pretty much everything being taken care of in his kit, as long as he gets the right team composition. His slot was previously taken up by Kurokumo Hong Lu, a Season 1 2-star identity with surprisingly good potency application. That very same potency can be found in Ring Hong Lu's skill 1, as it starts out as a 4-pot skill 1, which is pretty good. His skill 2 is also monstrous, as its damage reaches above 100 if you get the secondary skill, and with that skill you get to inflict a total of 2 bleed and 2 bleed count, with Corpus Theater also giving you a 70% chance for 3 more bleed, and a slim chance for even more potency. This is a lot of potency, and it's put on top of skills that actually deal damage. Not to mention, his skill 3 also inflicts a lot of potency and also deals a lot of damage. Yeah, Kurokumo Hong Lu gets swiftly outscaled in pretty much every relevant boss encounter, as his value lies entirely in bleed potency, while Ring adds damage and some count on top of that. Funnily enough, the boss prowess of this identity is only the tip of the iceberg, even though it's already enough to slot Hong Lu in. The real danger of this identity shows itself in long fights like the Refraction Railway, where Hong Lu gets to scale, increasing his power, damage and bleed, and gets access to an insanely strong AoE skill in closing time. Speaking of AoE, his skill 3-1 also gets to hit multiple targets, further solidifying Hong Lu as a fantastic answer to group encounters and abnormalities present in the railways. But really, none of this is news. Hong Lu is a monster, we get it. His bleed is good, his upfront damage is very respectable, and his scaling goes incredibly hard, with all aspects of his kit strengthening themselves as the fight goes on. He's an obvious perma slot in bleed, so we'll move on to the basics of Faust. Ring Apprentice Faust is basically 2 units in one. Her Iron Maiden form is geared for great amounts of short-term bleed count infliction, as Faust gets to inflict as much as 8 whole bleed count by absorbing enemy hits and winning a clash with her guard. This is useful in fights like Lei Heng and Wei, classic bosses with tons of coins, that usually force you to use Sanguine Desire to keep up. Notice how I didn't mention Rien, however, as the crux of Faust's viability lies in her usage of aggro, which simply does not work against Rien's unique mark targeting. Whenever aggro does work though, the maiden form performs well at absolutely spamming count in the enemy's face. This works so well, in fact, that Faust makes sanguineless clears of bosses that are usually hard to stack on pretty easy. Also, in all fights where Faust's maiden form shines, her support passive does too. Spikes allow you to get 4 bleed count per turn free of charge, as long as you fuel the passive and are utilizing defense skills. This works well with Anchor Ryoshu, who also has a guard that inflicts bleed against the attacker, allowing Faust to add value to the team even without being deployed. Iron Maiden is just one half of the picture though, as Faust also has her flow state, in which she turns into a mini version of Hong Lu, with similar stats and skills, although her bleed infliction remains more geared towards count than potency in this form as well. Flow state is good for multi-target encounters, as those tend to die to physical damage and not bleed damage. Much like Hong Lu, this version of Faust scales well as the fight drags on, allowing her to perform extremely well in the Refraction Railway. Unlike Hong Lu though, Faust has a bit of a slow start. She's forced to begin the fight in Iron Maiden, which lowers Faust's initial damage output. And her pre-fascia bleed infliction also isn't great, with just count being present and not even in a great amount. Also, her skill 2 lacks the secondary skill that Hong Lu has, which he can use to bring his damage over 100 and inflict a lot more bleed, making Faust just generally worse. Which, to be fair, was expected. She's the apprentice after all. Now let's talk about the scaling of the new Ring duo, with their unique charge and sword effects. Both units share their first passive, which allows them to convert corpus count into potency by consuming enough of it. This passive also gives them an initial supply of the effect based on the amount of ring identities present on the team. Keep this in mind, as this will be very important in the team building section. With just the 2 new rings, they begin at 4 corpus, meaning that on the first turn they can't consume the effect, as they need at least 10 for that. With 5 corpus being gained every turn by hitting the enemy, they won't be able to consume on turn 2 either, leading you to wait all the way until turn 3 to begin scaling. Alternatively, you can use a skill 2 on turn 1 for the extra count, but then you're losing one of the skills that can consume later. With a third ring identity present, consuming on turn 2 becomes possible, as a skill 1 on turn 1 brings you to 11 count, which decays to 10 and is exactly enough to begin consumption. A fourth ring identity only really benefits Hong Lu, as if on the second turn with 3 rings he uses a skill 2 against an enemy with 5 debuffs, he will gain 9 count and consume 9 as well. This sounds good, but in reality, Hong Lu then proceeds to decay to 9 count, which makes him unable to consume again, and only 9 count being consumed prevents him from getting his sword on turn 2. A fourth ring fixes this one specific issue. Faust doesn't have a secondary means of consumption on her skill 2, so she doesn't really care. And the fifth ring identity is not something we have in the game. But when we do get that, the House of Spiders Ring duo will be able to consume corpus ingredients as soon as turn 1, due to starting the fight with 10 count. And that's a pretty big breakpoint for the future. All of this potency business is used to empower Fascia and Tibia, the swords of the duo. Both effects are pretty similar, but Hong Lu gets one more stage. Funnily enough, the first stage of both effects begins at 1 potency, but the swords themselves are available only at 2 potency, meaning you will never have a stage 1 sword. An interesting fact about these effects is that the third stage is worded in a weird way, as the actual effect is stronger than what is said here. You'd expect stage 3 to increase whatever type of bleed you're inflicting by 1. But actually, it ends up inflicting both 1 potency and 1 count, regardless of whether you're inflicting potency or count, meaning that Hong Lu gets to inflict count with his skill 1 as well, while Faust gets more access to potency across her kit. This makes the third stage of the sword effects quite powerful, and that's why you need to keep track of the duo's charge economy, as you want to arrive at this point ASAP. Also, potency scales the attack weight of the third skills of these identities, which turns into extra damage against one target, so Corpus potency has a pretty big effect on the strongest skills of the Ring faction as well. Back to Hong Lu for a second, the man has a nuke called Closing Time. This skill becomes available when you use up all of his view in the tableau effect, which he starts with 21 of. He loses 2 each turn passively, and every time a Ring ally uses a skill, this effect loses 1 stack as well, once per turn per identity. The timing of Closing Time is directly dictated by the amount of Ring identities on your team. With just the new duo, you get the skill on turn 7, add a third and it's turn 6. With 4 rings it's 5. In the future, 5 rings will get Closing Time on turn 4. Instantly though, earlier Closing Time isn't necessarily always better, as you want that skill to consume at least 10 count so it can get buffed, and for Hong Lu to have 3 potency so he can get extra attack weight, meaning you'd like to scale a little before nuking, which can be inconsistent due to skill orders. Okay, at this point I explained the identities up and down, so let's look at their teams. Bleed was already a decently diverse composition, with a core of these 5 units being present in most variations, while the last 2 slots were chosen depending on the encounter. Ring Sang for count on bosses with lots of coins, Kurokumo Hong Lu for fast high bleed potency, and Ryoshu and Barber for physical AoE damage. I expected the Ring duo to kill that diversity by taking up these slots everywhere. And, well, a team of double Kurokumos, triple Bloodfiends and double Rings does work, and has a lot of AoE for stuff like Refraction Railway, as long as you forget that the current railway is a year old and doesn't let you use 7 identities, so you would drop Rodion. The one issue with giving Bloodfiends the advantage is that they don't provide that many debuffs, and very few of them stick around for more than 1 turn, so they don't really let Hong Lu use his skill 2-2 very often. But of course, extra Ring units benefit the new IDs greatly, so can we fit them in the team? Rin Yisang is the better of the two, so we'll look at him first. He can take over the slot of one of the Bloodfiends, and the weakest of the 3 is undoubtedly Rodion. Her main role is using Sanguine Desire, but with the count from Rin Yisang and Faust's maiden form, you can forgo using the ego on bosses like Lei Heng. Although I wouldn't drop Princess on Rian, and Ryoshu is forced on Rian anyways, so you have less real estate. Adding in Outis is a much taller order. If Yisang gives the new Ring duo the much needed 6 corpus count, all Outis brings in terms of synergy is a 1 turn cut for Closing Time. And as an identity, Outis is much weaker, and only really contributes to bleed count, while Yisang can help out with the 5 debuff conditional via burn and tremor count. For a synergy this weak, having Outis on the field is too big of a down payment, and I would not recommend using her with the new ego, unless that's literally all you have. Anyways, another funny little team you can look at if your name is Firefist Gregor and you can't stand the Bloodfiends is the modern attempt at salvaging Hemorrhage. With 2 Kurokumos, 3 rings, Anchor Prioshu and Ellen Gregor, you get access to a team that can potentially keep up tremor count with the help of Ring Sang, and that gives Hong Lu a ton of sticky debuffs in the form of Sad Tremor, Wounds, Bind, Awe and Contempt. The main issue with this funny little team is that you can't use it anywhere meaningful. The railway has 6 slots, Rien doesn't let you use Gregor, and Lei Heng dies in half a turn if you just show him Sanguine Desire and some bleed. But hey, this is the closest Hemorrhage in Bleed has ever been to being relevant, so let's applaud that. Anyways, I don't yet believe in Kurokumo's being replaceable, but if more rings come out with some good bleed infliction, maybe we can consider it. 3 Blood Fiends are valid for AoE, 3 rings are valid for extra synergy, and the Hemo team is at the very least unique. If there are any future developments, I'll keep you updated. The final question of the day is Charge, or rather Charge Envy. The Ring duo have a 33% Envy uptime, with only their skill 2s being Envy and no Envy defenses. Faust can circumvent that with a conveniently placed Hex Nail, which is an ego she uses quite well thanks to her haste. But Hong Lu is kinda stuck ruining your Envy chains, as his Envy ego option is Soda. Still though, the new duo have high damage and benefit greatly from charge support. This is especially true for Hong Lu, who gets to use an extra nuke skill that can consume up to 20 in between his first and second rotation. Maxing out his charge via external effects allows him to deal even more damage and scale even harder. Other than that, pairing the duo up with the middles allows the middle faction to finally get a taste of their conditionals when up against low coin count bosses, while Hong Lu enjoys a nice buffet of Vengeance marks and Vendetta marks, which let him use a ton of skill 2/2s for extra damage. Are the new identities usable in Charge Envy? Absolutely. But they don't seamlessly integrate themselves into the team, so you will need a bit of planning. Overall, I am very pleased with the Season 7 Ring banner. As a self-proclaimed bleed enthusiast, seeing these identities actually inflict a good amount of the effect and interact with their teammates in unique ways, while asking new questions about team building, is pretty awesome, and it's honestly more fun to play around than Ren Yisang's one-man army performance. Although admittedly, these units aren't at the Index Nursefather's level in terms of power. Should you get them? Of course. Should you bring back Ring Outis? Nah. If you disagree with me or have something to add, feel free to leave a comment below, and I might read it and respond. If you liked the video at any point, leave a like to let me know, and if you want to see more like this, consider subscribing. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you again soon. Goodbye!